Well, the Petroleum Industry Bill is a new piece of legislation that's still before the National Assembly that has responsibility for passing laws. And so whatever I say is subject to what the bill ultimately will be when it's passed into law. In other words, the changes that the National Assembly makes in its own wisdom. But it is a profound new piece of legislation in terms of what it seeks to do, transforming the governance arrangements in the industry, strengthening the institutions, creating a more transparent industry. And I think by and large, it creates a new legal framework for a robust and I think more successful petroleum industry in Nigeria.
Let's talk about the shortcomings of the petroleum industry in Nigeria. I mean, real ironies here. The 7th largest exporter of oil the world over, a major exporter to the United States. But within Nigeria, a chronic case of fuel shortages regularly. What is it about the structural problems of the petroleum industry inside Nigeria that has created so many problems for the economy?
Well, as you know, Nigeria is one of the larger exporters of crude oil. We have 4 refineries. The refineries are have not been functional as a result of a lack of maintenance over a long period of time. And so we are effectively a net importer. We haven't invested in downstream capacity over several years. And what we have now is some of the bottlenecks that have resulted from this lack of investment in the downstream, from the ports, jetties that were built several years ago that are constrained by the volumes of products that have to come in, to distribution bottlenecks as a result of the vandalism of pipelines that were traditionally used for the distribution of petroleum products across the country. The inefficiencies of the marketing arrangements, and I think all this has come together to create an inefficient downstream. I think that part of the solution is the deregulation policy which we're trying to implement. We're in the final stages of implementation in terms of trying to build a national consensus.
The international oil marketers are concerned. They say that they're being sidelined, not enough consultation with them. And for the local petroleum marketers, there are issues about whether or not they get their subsidies on time and whether or not the investment climate in Nigeria is conducive for them to raise money, to invest in the sector and to buy tracts of acreage within the ocean. So quite a few problems there in terms of what the reforms mean for the local and the international players. What sort of concessions are you offering the various industry players to incentivize them supporting the reforms?
We have a subsidy regime where marketers are supposed to be paid 45 days after they bring in products. They very often were not paid for sometimes up to 180 days. And of course, there are exchange rate risks, there's interest costs that aren't often reimbursed. The subsidy regime was designed as a restitution to put the marketer in the place he was. And these inefficiencies, the fact that they weren't paid in time, created a lack of capacity for the banks to support the market. We're addressing that now. One, I think it will be addressed through deregulation, and as I said, we're in the final stages of discussions to try and build an effective consensus to avoid the conflicts that have traditionally arisen as a result of efforts to deregulate the downstream.
All right, just in terms of new funding models, what are being proposed, because we also know that the Central Bank of Nigeria is already saying that it's concerned about having to pay for some of these subsidies over ₦1 trillion over the last 4 years, and there's a real need to deleverage government's involvement in terms of the funding of petroleum. And so the question is, how are you going to commercialize the space, and how are you going to support banking reforms in terms of coming up with new funding models for petroleum?
Well, the banking reforms, like the oil and gas industry reform, is designed to create a more transparent framework for operators, whether in the banks or in the oil and gas industry. It's really about risk management and transparency in the banks. There was a lot of malfeasance in some of the banks as a result of some of the things I've said before. The banking reform is seeking to address these issues, the requirement for greater transparency, better risk management, better openness, and for the banking industry to be able to support the sector. I think that once we are able to deregulate the downstream, people can recover their costs, then competition will do the rest. Right. I mean, people are concerned, at the moment we have a system where the structured costs are not even covered. And when we deregulate, we'll find that competition will determine, there will be a hike in price initially. I mean, we all anticipate that. Unfortunately, we're actually suffering a double jeopardy in the sense that because of the anticipation of a deregulated downstream, prices have already gone up, reflecting what they would be if we deregulated. So we're really suffering both ways, not getting the benefits of deregulation and the new investment that would arise from it, but at the same time suffering the higher prices that we have to contend with.
All right, one of the proposals also is to make the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation a profit-based independent organization, and I know that a lot of work's being done with the World Bank to try to see what credit lines are available for an independent entity. What is the envisaged role of the new organization?
Indeed, the transformation of the national oil company, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, is at the heart of the reform. It emphasizes the lack of clarity in terms of roles that we currently have between the ministry, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, and regulatory agencies. There's a lot of the roles of these three institutions aren't completely clear. The new reform seeks to make NNPC a profit-oriented, accountable commercial entity to compete with other international oil companies, to acquire assets and to make decisions based on the economics of the projects, and to be accountable to its shareholder. At the moment, the shareholder is the federal government and will continue to be, but we expect the new company to essentially sink or swim based on its work programs and assets.
What is being done to diversify the economy and to support broader reforms beyond petroleum?
Well, we recognize that we can't depend on, it's risky to depend on a volatile priced commodity like petroleum. And we've seen this in the last 2 years, especially where the price of crude has ranged from $30 to $35 to $147. Of course, price stabilization is important for countries like us that are resource dependent. But because of that, we're focusing on diversifying. Agriculture, of course, is a significant area that we're putting a lot of resources into. We have a vision 2020 that you're probably aware of, in which we seek to expand our economy to be one of the largest economies amongst the 20 top economies in the world. We recognize that to do that, we have to expand manufacturing, expand services, and to do that, we have to focus on building the infrastructure that will support that. And so we have a gas master plan that's designed to ensure the availability of gas supply to gas-based industries and other industries to power. We have very low power generation at the moment. And so we are focusing on ensuring that we create the environment and the infrastructure to support manufacturing, services, and other areas that will effectively grow our GDP and grow our economy.